Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world where steel clashed, honor was forged, and a single mistake, or a deliberate deception, could lead to a fate far worse than losing a joust. We're heading back to the dazzling, dangerous, and often brutal spectacle of medieval tournaments, where knights vied for glory, riches, and the favour of kings and ladies. But beneath the glittering pageantry and the thunder of hooves lay a darker truth. Cheating was always a temptation, and the punishments for it were, shall we say, less than lenient. Imagine the roar of the crowd, the sun glinting off polished armour, and then a sudden jarring sound as a knight's lance splinters, revealing a secret illegal alteration. The air changes, the cheers die down, and you realise that knight probably won't survive the day with his honour, or even his skin, intact. This isn't just about losing. It's about facing the wrath of a society obsessed with chivalry and justice. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the ground tremble beneath your feet, the distant thud of hooves growing louder, punctuated by the excited cries of the crowd. The tournament grounds, known as the lists, stretch out before you, a carefully prepared arena where the very essence of medieval knighthood is put to the ultimate test. This isn't just a sport. It's a living theatre, a brutal ballet, and a crucial proving ground for warriors, where their skill, courage, and honour are scrutinised by all. The air is thick with anticipation, the scent of horseflesh, sweat, and damp earth, mingling with the perfume of noble ladies and the rough smell of the common folk. You see banners fluttering, heralds in their vibrant tabards, and knights, resplendent in their highly polished armour, preparing for the clash. The heart of the medieval tournament was the joust, a terrifying head-on collision between two armoured knights on horseback, each aiming a long, heavy lance at the other. The goal was to unseat your opponent, or at the very least shatter your lance dramatically upon their shield or helmet. The raw power, the precise timing, and the sheer nerve required for such an endeavour were immense. Victory brought fame, riches, and elevated status. Defeat brought humiliation, injury, or worse. You probably wouldn't survive more than 10 seconds in one of these things, so let's just observe from a safe distance, shall we? But even in this age of supposed chivalry and martial virtue, the lure of an unfair advantage, of guaranteed victory, was a constant temptation. Just as in any competitive arena, human nature, with its darker impulses, found ways to try and bend the rules. From subtle manipulations to outright deception, cheating was a shadow that always lurked within the glittering spectacle of the lists, and the consequences, as you'll soon discover, were severe, often brutal, and always aimed at eradicating the very notion of dishonour. The sheer value of success in a tournament cannot be overstated. A victorious knight could win valuable prizes, horses, armour, ransoms from defeated opponents, and considerable sums of money. More importantly, victory brought immense prestige, drawing the attention of kings, queens, and powerful nobles, potentially leading to lucrative patronage, land grants, or even marriage into influential families. Failure, on the other hand, could mean financial ruin, loss of reputation, and, if seriously injured, even death. With such high stakes, the temptation to cheat was ever present, a whisper in the ear of even the most outwardly honourable knight. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval tournaments offered significant material rewards and social advancement for successful knights, making the stakes for victory very high. A quirky tidbit is that early tournaments were often much less organised and far more chaotic affairs than their later, more formalised counterparts. They frequently devolved into mass melees with hundreds of knights, making it incredibly difficult to police any form of cheating. Imagine trying to catch someone slipping a banana peel on the track during a full-blown NASCAR pileup. It was pretty much like that, but with swords. This lack of initial oversight actually created a fertile ground for informal rule-breaking, which in turn spurred the development of stricter regulations over time. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for cheating in medieval tournaments was purely financial gain, or if it was more deeply rooted in the desire for enhanced social status and personal glory within the rigid hierarchy of feudal society. Regardless, The act of deception struck at the very core of what a tournament was meant to embody, a fair and honourable test of knightly virtue. The systems put in place to detect and punish such transgressions reveal a deep concern for maintaining the integrity of this vital cultural institution. The elaborate nature of the punishments also reflects the seriousness with which society viewed any perceived affront to the chivalric ideal. As you stand here, feeling the vibrations of the impending joust, remember that behind every shining lance and every emblazoned shield lay the potential for betrayal, and the iron-clad resolve of a society determined to uphold its honour at any cost. From the thrilling chaos of the lists, where the pursuit of victory often overshadowed fair play, you now delve into the very bedrock of medieval knightly conduct, the chivalric code and the absolute honours imperative that was supposed to govern every action. Imagine a knight, not just as a fighter, but as an embodiment of virtues, courage, loyalty, generosity, and above all, honour. This wasn't just a nice idea, it was the entire framework of their existence, and any breach could shatter their world. It's like a medieval rule book for being a good person, but if you break a rule, you might get disemboweled. The chivalric code was an unwritten, yet deeply ingrained set of ideals and behavioural expectations that emerged during the High Middle Ages. It wasn't a formal constitution, but rather a complex web of customs, religious tenets, and aristocratic values that shaped the identity of the knightly class. At its core lay the concept of honour's imperative. A knight's honour was his most valuable possession, more precious than land, titles, or even life itself. It defined his worth, his reputation, and his very right to bear arms. This was the currency of their social standing, meticulously guarded and fiercely defended. This is a mainstream historical fact. The chivalric code, while not codified, emphasised virtues like honour, courage, and loyalty as central to knightly identity. Within the context of tournaments, honour's imperative meant that a knight was expected to compete fairly, to display genuine courage, and to accept victory or defeat with grace. The joust was not merely a physical contest, it was a moral one, a public demonstration of a knight's adherence to the lofty ideals of chivalry. To cheat, therefore, was not just breaking a rule, it was a profound betrayal of one's own honour, a stain that could never truly be washed away. It was considered an act of cowardice, a profound lack of respect for oneself, one's opponent, and the very institution of knighthood. Imagine being labelled a coward in a society where your entire identity revolved around bravery. It would be a permanent social media cancellation, but without the option to just delete your account. The code emphasised virtues such as largesse, generosity, which meant a victorious knight should not be overly greedy in ransoming his opponent. It also stressed franchise, nobility of spirit, urging knights to be honest and straightforward in their dealings. Any act of deception, whether it was secretly weighting armour, tampering with a lance, or feigning injury, directly contravened these fundamental principles. It was a direct attack on the very concept of truth within the knightly class. The spectators, from the highest nobles to the lowest commoners, understood and upheld this code. They were not just passive observers, they were the jury, their cheers and jeers acting as powerful arbiters of a knight's reputation. A knight known for cheating would face not only official penalties, but also widespread social ostracism. His name would be whispered with scorn, ladies would turn their backs, and other honourable knights might refuse to compete against him. This social punishment could be far more devastating than any fine or imprisonment. A quirky tidbit is that the chivalric code often created paradoxical situations. For example, a knight was expected to fight bravely, but also to show mercy. He should defend the weak, but also be ready to seize ransom from a defeated opponent. These internal contradictions sometimes led to ethical dilemmas on the tournament field, blurring the lines of what constituted honourable behaviour, especially when self-preservation or financial ruin loomed. It's like having a moral compass that sometimes points in two different directions, and you have to decide which one is less likely to get you branded a scoundrel. Historians still argue whether the chivalric code was a genuine behavioural ideal, widely adopted by medieval knights, or largely a romanticised literary construct, primarily found in epic poems and romances, with actual knightly conduct often falling far short of its lofty demands. Regardless, Its powerful influence on how cheating was perceived and punished is undeniable, indicating a pervasive cultural expectation of fair play. The severity of the penalties for violating this code underscores the immense importance society placed on maintaining the integrity of knightly honour, both on and off the field. As you consider the weight of this invisible code, you realise that for a medieval knight, the tournament was not just a game. It was a sacred trust, a reflection of their soul, and any attempt to corrupt it was an affront of the highest order, demanding the harshest retribution. From the lofty ideals of the chivalric code, which placed honour above all else, you now step into the more practical, yet still evolving realm of early rules, the often unwritten laws that knights and tournament organisers attempted to enforce. Imagine a time before comprehensive rulebooks, where consensus and precedent, rather than codified statutes, tried to bring order to the exhilarating chaos of the joust. It's like trying to officiate a modern sports match based purely on a collective agreement, rather than an official rulebook. Things could get a little interpretive. In the nascent stages of medieval tournaments, particularly during the 11th and 12th centuries, the rules governing these spectacular events were far from standardised. They were often unwritten laws, a mixture of local custom, common understanding among the knightly class, and the dictates of the particular lord hosting the event. There wasn't a universal tournament rulebook of 1150 that everyone adhered to. Instead, knights relied on what was considered fair play by the established conventions of their social circles. This fluidity meant that what might be acceptable in one region or at one lord's lists could be deemed cheating elsewhere. This is a mainstream historical fact. Early medieval tournament rules were largely uncodified, varying significantly by region and host. These unwritten laws largely revolved around maintaining a semblance of fairness and preventing outright treachery. For instance, while specific lance sizes or armour weights might not have been precisely regulated, there was an implicit understanding that a knight shouldn't use an impossibly long or heavy lance to gain an undue advantage. Similarly, sabotaging an opponent's equipment before a joust, while not explicitly forbidden by a written decree, would have been seen as a profound breach of knightly conduct and honour. It's the kind of thing that wouldn't necessarily get you arrested, but it would definitely get you ostracised, which, in medieval society, was arguably worse. You know, like showing up to a potluck with store-bought cookies and claiming you baked them yourself. Major social faux pas. The enforcement of these early rules often fell to the host lord, his marshals, and the assembled company of knights themselves. Reputations were built not just on skill, but on adherence to these understood standards. If a knight gained a reputation for consistently pushing the boundaries of fair play, even without explicitly breaking a written rule, he would quickly find himself shunned. Other knights might refuse to joust with him, and his invitations to future tournaments would mysteriously dry up. The collective disapproval of his peers was a powerful deterrent, sometimes more effective than any formal punishment. As tournaments grew in popularity and scale, and the stakes became higher, remember the potential for fame, fortune, and marriage, the need for more formalised rules became apparent. The very fluidity of the early unwritten laws created opportunities for ambiguity and deliberate exploitation, which in turn necessitated clearer regulations and more structured oversight. The chaotic melees of the early period, where entire groups of knights clashed, gradually gave way to more ordered jousts and rounds, which were easier to police. A quirky tidbit is that some of the earliest rules for tournaments often prohibited direct killing, aiming to make the contests less deadly, and more about the capture and ransom of opponents. However, knights frequently ignored these rules, driven by bloodlust or simply the desire to eliminate a formidable rival. It's like a medieval gentleman's agreement that often ended up in a full-blown brawl, proving that even the most honourable intentions can go sideways when competitive instincts kick in. Historians still argue whether the move towards more formalised tournament rules was primarily driven by a genuine desire for increased fairness and safety, or if it was more a pragmatic response by host lords to control the violence and maximise the entertainment value of their events. Regardless, the evolution from unwritten laws to more explicit regulations reveals a growing awareness of the need to combat cheating and maintain the integrity of the knightly spectacle. These early informal guidelines laid the groundwork for the increasingly harsh punishments that would follow as tournaments became more organised and the consequences of deception more thoroughly understood. Building on the evolving, often unwritten rules, you now approach the very stage where knightly honour was publicly tested. The lists considered a sacred ground for chivalric display. Imagine stepping onto that meticulously prepared field, the air thick with tension and expectation, knowing that every inch of this space was consecrated not by holy water, but by the intense weight of reputation, oath, and potentially brutal violence. It's like a medieval boxing ring, but instead of just a fight, your entire identity is on the line, and the referee is God himself. The lists were not simply an arbitrary plot of land. They were carefully chosen and prepared, often featuring a long flat stretch of ground divided by a wooden barrier, known as the tilt, which separated the two jousting knights. Around this central arena, tiered seating or earthen mounds would rise, accommodating the throngs of spectators, from royalty and high nobility in their richly adorned pavilions, to common folk jostling for a glimpse of the action. The entire area was meticulously cordoned off, creating a distinct boundary between the chaotic outside world and the ordered ceremonial space within. This is a mainstream historical fact. Tournament lists were specifically prepared arenas, often including a tilt barrier for jousting. What made the lists a sacred ground was not religious consecration in the formal sense, but the immense weight of the chivalric ideals and the social contract that governed the tournament. Every knight entering this space was understood to be operating under a solemn oath, an unwritten yet universally acknowledged commitment to fair play, courage, and honour. Breaching this oath within the lists was not just a violation of rules, it was an act of profound sacrilege against the very spirit of knighthood. It was a space where divine judgment was implicitly invoked, where God was considered to be observing the conduct of the knights. You can almost feel the invisible pressure, the weight of centuries of tradition bearing down on every competitor. It's like the ultimate high-stakes job interview, but instead of just a resume, you're judged by how well you can avoid cheating death while trying to hit someone with a stick. The rituals surrounding entry into the lists further underscored their sacred nature. Knights would often parade into the arena with their heraldic banners, sometimes accompanied by squires or pages, in a formal procession that emphasized their lineage and their commitment to the event. Their armor would be checked, their lances inspected, at least in later periods, and their identities confirmed. This meticulous process was designed to ensure that only those deemed worthy and honourable were permitted to compete in this hallowed space. Any attempt to sneak in with doctored equipment or a false identity was seen as a direct affront to the sanctity of the lists. For the knight, success or failure within the lists held immense spiritual significance. A victory achieved through honourable combat was seen as a sign of divine favour, a testament to their virtue. Conversely, a defeat, especially one suffered after an attempt at cheating, was often interpreted as a sign of God's displeasure, a clear indication that justice had been served. The public nature of the tournament meant that these judgments, both human and divine, were instantly visible to all, shaping a knight's reputation for years, if not generations. A quirky tidbit is that the ground within the lists was sometimes prepared with specific types of soil or sand to ensure good footing for the horses and to minimise dust, highlighting the practical care that also went into creating this sacred space. This attention to detail, while seemingly mundane, speaks to the overall importance of the arena. It's like ensuring your spiritual battlefield has excellent drainage. Historians still argue whether the concept of the lists as sacred ground was a genuinely held spiritual belief among all participants, or primarily a rhetorical device employed by chroniclers and poets to elevate the moral stature of tournaments and reinforce knightly ideals. Regardless, the pervasive language surrounding honour and divine judgment within the lists undeniably shaped the severity of punishments for cheating. The idea that you were not just cheating an opponent, but betraying the very ground you stood upon, added an almost theological weight to every transgression, paving the way for truly harsh retribution. From the sacred ground of the lists, where honour was meticulously upheld, you now enter the murky realm of deceit, disguised identities, and the false pretences knights sometimes adopted to gain an unfair edge. Imagine a knight, his face hidden behind a visor, his shield emblazoned with unfamiliar arms, riding into the lists not to prove his true prowess, but to exploit his anonymity and deceive his opponents. It's like showing up to a high-stakes poker game wearing a mask and using a fake name, hoping no one calls your bluff. The practice of disguised identities was a persistent challenge in medieval tournaments. While later, more formalised tournaments required knights to present their true heraldic arms, and sometimes even swear oaths of identity, earlier or less strictly policed events offered opportunities for deception. A knight might enter under false pretences for several reasons. Perhaps he was a seasoned veteran seeking to easily win prizes from less experienced jousters, avoiding the risk of facing equally formidable opponents. Or he might be a knight of lesser standing hoping to gain fame by defeating renowned champions, but without the pressure or direct challenge that revealing his true name would entail. Imagine the cunning, the deliberate concealment of skill to surprise an unsuspecting opponent. It's like a famous athlete secretly entering an amateur competition just to dominate, which, let's be honest, would probably lead to a lot of disgruntled participants. Another, more insidious reason for adopting a disguised identity was to avoid the consequences of losing. If a knight was defeated, especially if he was unhorsed or injured, his identity might remain unknown, sparing him the humiliation and the financial burden of ransom. This allowed him to compete with less personal risk to his reputation, a subtle form of cheating that undermined the very public display of honour the tournament sought to uphold. You could essentially fail spectacularly and just ghost the event, hoping no one recognised your specific brand of clumsiness. The act of hiding one's identity was particularly problematic in tournaments where knights fought for ransoms. If a defeated knight's identity remained unknown, he could simply vanish without paying his ransom, defrauding his victorious opponent. This directly attacked the economic underpinnings of the tournament, which often provided a significant source of income for successful knights. It transformed the honourable exchange of ransom into a game of hide-and-seek, where the cheater always had the advantage. Marshals and heralds, as you'll learn later, developed methods to combat this. They would inspect the arms on a knight's shield, looking for inconsistencies or signs of recent alteration. They might question squires or attendants about their master's origins. But the very nature of a fully armoured knight, with face obscured, presented a significant challenge to identification. A quirky tidbit is that some knights would intentionally adopt fictional or romantic names for tournaments, calling themselves things like the Knight of the Burning Heart or the Black Knight, which, while adding to the mystique, also made it easier to conceal their true identities if they wished to cheat. This was a fine line between theatrical flair and outright deception. It's like calling yourself Captain Awesome online. Sometimes it's just for fun, sometimes it's because you're about to do something questionable. Historians still argue whether the practice of disguised identities was widespread enough to significantly impact the overall fairness of tournaments, or if it was a relatively rare occurrence, largely confined to less formal events. Regardless, the very existence of rules and methods to counter such deceptions indicates that it was a recognised form of cheating, deemed serious enough to warrant vigilant oversight. The inherent dishonesty of competing under false pretences was a direct affront to the chivalric code, threatening the integrity of the knightly order and the very concept of honourable combat. Moving from the shadowy world of disguised identities, you now step into the more tangible realm of equipment tampering, weighted armour, and the hidden secrets knights sometimes concealed to gain an illicit advantage. Imagine a knight, outwardly resplendent in his gleaming steel, but beneath the polished surface, cunningly placed lead weights or extra layers of mail are secretly enhancing his protection or throwing off his opponent's aim. It's like a medieval athlete secretly wearing ankle weights in a sprint race. They're trying to make themselves stronger, or at least appear so, at the expense of fairness. The effectiveness of a knight's armour in a joust was paramount. It was his primary defence against the bone-shattering impact of a lance. While armour was inherently heavy, typically weighing anywhere from 50 to 80 pounds, the temptation to add extra, undetectable weight was a known form of cheating. Weighted armour could be achieved in several ways. A knight might secretly line parts of his breastplate or helmet with thin sheets of lead, or strategically insert extra layers of mail beneath his plate armour in critical areas. The goal was to make himself more difficult to unseat, adding inert mass that his opponent would have to overcome purely through brute force. This is a mainstream historical fact. Knights could illegally alter their armour to gain an advantage in tournaments, including adding weight. These hidden secrets were incredibly difficult to detect. especially in the heat of a tournament where time for meticulous inspections was limited. The added weight, if distributed cleverly, might not be immediately obvious. Moreover, armour designs varied significantly, making it hard to establish a universal standard of too heavy. A knight could simply claim his armour was custom-made, or that certain sections were simply thicker for added protection, even if those additions were designed purely to make him a more formidable, unmovable target. Imagine trying to explain to a medieval marshal that your oddly heavy helmet is just a fashion statement. It would be a tough sell. The problem with weighted armour wasn't just about making the wearer harder to unseat. It also subtly influenced the joust itself. An opponent might break their lance prematurely on an illegally heavy chestplate, or miss their mark due to the unexpected solidity of the target. This kind of deception undermined the pure skill and strength expected in the joust, reducing it to a game of who could cheat more effectively. It's like a medieval pay-to-win strategy, where those with the resources to modify their gear gained an unfair edge. Marshals and heralds, recognizing this potential for fraud, would eventually incorporate methods of inspection. They might visually assess a knight's posture and how his horse carried him, looking for signs of undue strain. In later periods, more thorough inspections of armour before a joust became common, though even then, a truly cunning cheater might find ways to conceal small, dense weights. The difficulty of proving such a subtle alteration meant that accusations, when they arose, were often highly contentious and could lead to bitter disputes, sometimes even escalating to personal feuds. A quirky tidbit is that medieval armourers, highly skilled craftsmen, sometimes received requests for armour that was subtly reinforced in ways that bordered on the illicit. They walked a fine line between providing optimal protection and creating gear that could be used for cheating, often relying on their own ethical standards to guide them. It's like a car mechanic being asked to secretly tamper with an engine to give it illegal horsepower. Some would, some wouldn't. Historians still argue whether the use of weighted armour was a widespread and significant problem in medieval tournaments, or if it was a relatively rare and isolated form of cheating, difficult to execute without detection. Regardless, the very existence of mentions and prohibitions against it in historical accounts indicates that it was a known and serious concern, deemed damaging enough to the integrity of the joust to warrant specific, albeit challenging, countermeasures. The fact that knights went to such lengths to incorporate hidden secrets into their most vital protective gear underscores the extreme pressure they faced to win, and the length some would go to achieve victory, even at the cost of honour. From the hidden deceptions of weighted armour, you now turn your attention to another form of equipment tampering: doctored lances, and the broken integrity they represented. Imagine a knight, not just relying on skill and strength, but secretly altering his lance to shatter more easily, or to deliver a more devastating blow, all in a calculated attempt to manipulate the outcome of the joust. It's like a medieval boxer putting lead in their gloves, a seemingly subtle change that completely undermines the fairness of the contest. The lance was the primary weapon in the joust, a long wooden spear designed to break upon impact. The ideal joust was a clean break, unseating the opponent with a satisfying crash. However, the temptation to manipulate the lance for an unfair advantage was a constant concern. Doctored lances could be altered in several ways. A knight might secretly weaken his own lance, not to inflict more damage, but to ensure it shattered dramatically upon his opponent's shield, even if the blow wasn't truly decisive. This was a form of theatrical cheating, designed to impress the crowd and the judges, even if the actual force of the impact was minimal. This is a mainstream historical fact. Knights sometimes tampered with their lances to ensure they broke dramatically, even if the impact wasn't forceful. Conversely, a more insidious form of doctored lance involved strengthening the tip, perhaps by adding a small metal point or using exceptionally dense wood to deliver a more concussive blow. This was far more dangerous, increasing the risk of serious injury or even death. It transformed the joust from a test of skill into a potentially lethal act of aggression, violating the implicit understanding that tournaments, while dangerous, were not meant to be outright murder attempts. You know, like bringing a bazooka to a water balloon fight. It's a bit of an overreaction. The problem with doctored lances was that they undermined the very integrity of the joust. It was supposed to be a contest of skill and strength, judged by the force of the impact and the ability to unseat an opponent. A manipulated lance introduced an artificial element, where the outcome was determined not by genuine prowess, but by premeditated deception. It was a betrayal of the trust placed in each knight to compete fairly. Detecting a doctored lance was extremely difficult. The speed of the joust, the shattering impact, and the general chaos of the lists made close inspection nearly impossible in real time. Only after the joust, if suspicion arose, could a lance be examined, and even then, subtle alterations might be missed. This difficulty in detection made the punishment for such cheating, when discovered, particularly severe, as it represented a deliberate and calculated attempt to subvert the entire system of honourable combat. A quirky tidbit is that some knights believed that the spirits of their ancestors could influence the outcome of a joust. This belief, while not directly related to cheating, added another layer of complexity. Imagine the added pressure of not only trying to win, but also trying to appease the ghosts of your family. It's like having a celestial sports agent, and you really don't want to disappoint them. Historians still argue whether the practice of using doctored lances was motivated more by a desire for theatrical display, to impress the crowd and judges with a spectacular break, or by a more sinister intent to inflict greater damage on an opponent. Regardless, the intentional manipulation of equipment, however subtle, was considered a profound breach of knightly honour. The shattering of a lance was meant to be a symbol of skill, not a testament to deceit, and any attempt to corrupt this symbol demanded swift and decisive retribution. Beyond the human and their equipment, your attention now turns to another crucial element of the joust that could be exploited for unfair advantage: drugged horses, leading to unfair steeds. Imagine a knight's magnificent warhorse, usually a paragon of strength and discipline, suddenly behaving erratically, stumbling or refusing to obey commands, a victim of a competitor's insidious plot to gain an illicit edge. It's like a medieval Grand Prix, but one of the drivers secretly gives their opponent's car a flat tyre before the race. The warhorse, Destria, was an invaluable asset to a medieval knight, a finely trained and immensely powerful animal, crucial for both combat and tournament success. Its speed, agility, and willingness to charge were paramount in a joust. Therefore, any attempt to incapacitate or disadvantage an opponent's horse was considered a grave act of cheating, striking at the very heart of fair competition and potentially endangering the lives of both knight and beast. This is a mainstream historical fact. Sabotaging an opponent's horse was a recognised, albeit abhorrent, form of cheating in medieval warfare and, by extension, tournaments. The act of drugging a horse could take various forms, though the specific substances used are not always explicitly detailed in historical records. However, medieval knowledge of herbs and their effects, both beneficial and detrimental, was surprisingly extensive. A competitor, or more likely their unscrupulous squire or servant, might administer substances designed to make the horse lethargic, overly skittish, or even mildly disoriented. This could be done by adding a concoction to the horse's feed or water, or perhaps by rubbing an irritating substance into its sensitive areas. The goal was to ensure the horse performed poorly, perhaps veering off course, slowing its charge, or simply failing to maintain a straight line, thereby hindering its knight's ability to couch a lance effectively, or even causing him to be unseated. You can almost feel the frustration and betrayal of a knight whose loyal steed, through no fault of its own, suddenly becomes a liability. It's like your super-fast gaming computer suddenly developing a persistent lag, and you know someone's been messing with the Wi-Fi. The consequences for the knight whose unfair steeds were exposed were severe. Beyond the immediate loss of the joust, the act of harming an animal, particularly one as revered and essential as a warhorse, was viewed with disgust. It lacked the honour expected of a knight, stooping to a base form of sabotage that had no place in chivalric combat. Such an act reflected poorly not only on the knight, but also on his entire retinue and even his lord. Detecting such a subtle form of cheating was incredibly challenging. Unless the horse exhibited overt dramatic symptoms, it would be difficult to prove deliberate interference. A poor performance could always be attributed to the horse simply having an off day or being poorly trained. This ambiguity made it a tempting, albeit high-risk, form of cheating. Accusations, when they did arise, often relied on circumstantial evidence or the testimony of disloyal servants. A quirky tidbit is that some medieval veterinary texts actually contained remedies for animals believed to have been bewitched or poisoned, indicating that the concept of external malicious interference with an animal's performance was a recognised concern, whether from human or supernatural sources, it suggests a prevailing belief that such tactics were not entirely outside the realm of possibility. Historians still argue whether the deliberate drugging or incapacitation of horses was a widespread and commonly employed tactic in medieval tournaments, or if it was a relatively rare occurrence due to the difficulty of execution and the severe social stigma attached to such an act. Regardless, the very existence of mentions or implied prohibitions against harming an opponent's mount underscores the deep importance of the horse in knightly combat and the lengths some individuals would go to secure victory. The notion of drugged horses and unfair steeds directly contradicted the ideals of fair play and the reverence for the noble animals central to the tournament, making it a particularly contemptible form of deceit. From the insidious tactics of sabotaging mounts, you now shift to a more mystical yet equally illicit form of seeking advantage: magical charms and the belief in supernatural cheats. Imagine a knight, not just relying on his steel and skill, but also on a hidden amulet, a whispered incantation, or a supposedly enchanted trinket, hoping to gain an unseen edge over his opponent. It's like a medieval athlete trying to win by secretly having a wizard cast a spell on the opposing team, which honestly would make for a much more interesting tournament. In medieval society, the line between the natural and supernatural was often blurred. Belief in witchcraft, sorcery, protective charms, and divine intervention was widespread, influencing every aspect of life, including warfare and tournaments. Knights, despite their outward piety, might secretly turn to illicit magical means to ensure victory, believing that a well-placed curse or a potent charm could turn the tide of a joust. This is a mainstream historical fact. Belief in magic and its potential influence on events, including battles and contests, was common in medieval Europe. These magical charms could take various forms. A knight might carry a small pouch containing supposedly enchanted herbs, a fragment of bone from a saint, or something passed off as such, or a piece of parchment inscribed with a spell. These items might be sewn into their clothing, hidden within their armour, or even secretly held in their gauntlet during the joust. The intent behind these supernatural cheats was varied: to weaken an opponent, to protect oneself from harm, to ensure the lance struck true, or to make the horse more agile. You can almost feel the desperate hope, the quiet superstition, that might lead a knight to seek such forbidden aid, especially when facing a formidable opponent. It's a bit like wearing your lucky socks to a job interview, but with potentially demonic consequences if they don't work. The effectiveness of such charms, of course, is debatable in our modern understanding, but in the medieval mind, their power was very real. If a knight wearing a charm won unexpectedly, it might be attributed to the charm's influence, reinforcing the belief in its efficacy. Conversely, if he lost, it might be blamed on a stronger counter-charm or a lack of faith. The use of magical charms was considered a grave offence, not just a breach of tournament rules, but a violation of religious law. Sorcery and witchcraft were condemned by the Church, seen as dealings with demonic forces. A knight found to be employing such supernatural cheats faced not only the wrath of the tournament officials, but also the terrifying prospect of ecclesiastical punishment, which could include excommunication or even trials for heresy. This elevated the act of cheating from a mere sporting transgression to a spiritual crime. Detecting such hidden charms was almost impossible, relying more on suspicion, rumour, or a direct confession, perhaps under duress or as a result of religious conviction. A knight who consistently won against all odds, or one who seemed unusually lucky, might fall under suspicion of using illicit magic. A quirky tidbit is that some historical accounts describe instances where knights would wear fragments of text from religious scriptures as protective talismans, blurring the line between sanctioned piety and superstitious charm. This highlights the complex spiritual landscape of the era, where true faith and folk magic often coexisted uneasily. It's like using a prayer book as a bulletproof vest. It might work, but probably not how you think it does. Historians still argue whether the belief in magical charms and supernatural cheats was genuinely widespread among the knightly class, or if it was more a perception held by the common populace and exploited by unscrupulous individuals. Regardless, the fear and condemnation surrounding such practices indicate that any attempt to gain an advantage through illicit spiritual means was deemed a profound betrayal of honour and a direct affront to divine order, deserving of the harshest possible penalties. The very idea that one might subvert the will of God through such means made these forms of cheating particularly heinous in the eyes of medieval society. From the shadowy whispers of magical charms, you now encounter a more overt yet equally insidious form of deception, false boasts and the reputation's lies they propagated. Imagine a knight arriving at a tournament, not just with his actual achievements, but with exaggerated tales of prowess, fabricated victories, and invented noble lineage, all designed to intimidate opponents and impress the crowd before a single lance is broken. It's like a medieval version of online trolling, where you try to scare off the competition with inflated claims and fake credentials. In the medieval world, reputation was everything. A knight's standing was built not only on his skill in combat, but also on his lineage, his past deeds, and the tales told about him. The temptation to embellish these stories, or even outright invent them, was strong, especially for knights seeking to make a name for themselves quickly, or to intimidate formidable opponents. False boasts were a direct attack on the integrity of this system, creating a deceptive aura of invincibility. This is a mainstream historical fact. Knights sometimes engaged in exaggerated self-promotion or fabricated achievements to enhance their reputation. These reputation's lies could manifest in various ways. A knight might claim to have defeated famous champions in battles or previous tournaments where he wasn't even present. He might invent heroic deeds performed against mythical beasts or overwhelming odds. Or he might simply inflate the number of enemies he had slain or the ransoms he had collected. The goal was to create an air of formidable prowess, hoping that opponents, intimidated by his supposed past, would hesitate in the joust or even withdraw from the contest. You can almost feel the smug satisfaction of a knight who manages to win without actually having to fight, simply by crafting a compelling, albeit entirely untrue, narrative. It's like winning a staring contest by just talking endlessly about how good you are at staring. Beyond intimidation, false boasts also aimed to impress the host lord and the ladies, who often judged a knight's worth based on his perceived valour. A knight with a grand, albeit fabricated, reputation might receive more favourable treatment, better lodgings, or even more attention from potential patrons. This skewed the playing field before the actual combat even began, transforming the tournament into a popularity contest based on deception rather than genuine merit. The challenge in detecting false boasts lay in the oral nature of information transmission. News travelled slowly and verification was difficult. Unless a knight's claims were demonstrably false, and widely known to be so by multiple witnesses, it was hard to formally accuse him. However, whispers of skepticism could spread, and a knight caught in too many inconsistencies would quickly lose face. His armour of lies would begin to crack under scrutiny. A quirky tidbit is that some noble families actually had professional storytellers, or poets whose job it was to compose elaborate genealogies and heroic tales for their patrons, blurring the line between genuine historical record and glorified propaganda. This made it even harder to distinguish between legitimate claims and false boasts. It's like hiring a public relations firm whose primary job is to create fan fiction about your life. Historians still argue whether false boasts were primarily a strategic form of psychological warfare against opponents, or if they were more a reflection of the performative nature of medieval chivalry, where appearance and narrative were as important as reality. Regardless, the act of propagating reputation's lies was considered a breach of honour. It undermined the trust that underpinned knightly society, and attempted to gain advantage through deception rather than genuine merit, making it a form of cheating that, while not involving physical tampering, struck directly at the moral fabric of the tournament. From the carefully crafted deceptions of false boasts, your focus now shifts to an external, often unpredictable source of unfair advantage, spectator interference, and the crowd's betrayal. Imagine the roar of the crowd, usually a source of motivation, suddenly turning into a chaotic tide, with partisan onlookers actively trying to influence the joust, perhaps by throwing objects, shouting warnings, or even trying to trip a horse. It's like a modern sporting event where the fans rush the field mid-game, but instead of just stopping play, they're trying to win the match for their favoured team by any means necessary. The medieval tournament was as much a spectacle for the common folk as it was a display for the nobility. Crowds could be immense, passionate, and fiercely partisan, cheering wildly for their local champion or jeering loudly at an unpopular knight. While this enthusiasm added to the atmosphere, it also presented an opportunity for illicit intervention. spectator interference was a real concern, leading to instances where the fervent support of the crowd crossed the line from vocal encouragement to active sabotage. This is a mainstream historical fact. Spectator interference, though typically condemned, was a known issue in medieval tournaments. The forms of crowd's betrayal could vary. On the milder end, you might have fervent supporters shouting warnings to their favoured knight about an opponent's strategy or a perceived weakness in their armour. While not directly physical, such warnings could still provide an unfair advantage by giving one knight foreknowledge not available to the other. Imagine yelling, "He's going for the shield!" Just as the lances are couched, it's subtle, but it's cheating. More egregiously, some spectators, particularly those with a vested interest or simply consumed by fanaticism, might resort to physical interference. This could include throwing small, hard objects onto the list to distract an opponent's horse, or even in extreme cases attempting to trip a horse as it galloped past. Such actions were incredibly dangerous, risking serious injury or death to both knight and steed. You can almost feel the surge of panic as a knight's horse stumbles, not from a lance, but from a rock thrown by an unseen hand in the crowd. It's like being in a video game where suddenly the environment starts glitching out, but the glitch is a hurled rotten tomato. The challenge of controlling spectator interference was immense. Crowds were often vast and unruly, and the sheer number of people made it difficult to identify and apprehend individual culprits. Tournament marshals and guards would attempt to keep order, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. The anonymity of the crowd provided a shield for those willing to engage in such blatant acts of cheating. When such interference was discovered, or even strongly suspected, it brought shame not only upon the individual culprit, but also upon the entire faction or region they supported. The host lord might impose fines on the responsible parties, or, in severe cases, even halt the tournament, signalling the gravity of the transgression. A quirky tidbit is that some tournament accounts mention specific areas of the lists being more prone to interference, often near particularly passionate local supporter sections, leading marshals to deploy extra guards in those areas. It's like knowing which sections of a modern stadium are most likely to throw batteries, and then adding more security. Historians still argue whether spectator interference was an isolated nuisance, or a widespread problem that significantly undermined the legitimacy of tournament outcomes. Regardless, the very existence of rules and measures to control the crowd indicates that it was a recognised and serious threat to fair play. The crowd's betrayal, when it occurred, revealed a darker side of the otherwise celebratory atmosphere, exposing the lengths some would go to ensure victory, even if it meant resorting to the unchivalric tactics of the common folk. From the unpredictable chaos of spectator interference, your attention now shifts to the diligent figures tasked with maintaining order and fairness within the lists, the herald's role and their function as the enforcer's eye. Imagine a herald, resplendent in his brightly coloured tabard emblazoned with royal or noble arms, not just announcing knights, but keenly observing every detail, his presence a constant reminder that breaches of honour would not go unnoticed. It's like a medieval security camera, but with a much more impressive uniform and a penchant for dramatic pronouncements. The herald's role in medieval tournaments was multifaceted and crucial, extending far beyond merely announcing the names of the competing knights. They were the masters of ceremony, the keepers of heraldry, and most importantly in our context, the primary enforcer's eye against cheating and disorder. Heralds were learned men, often possessing deep knowledge of noble lineages, heraldic devices, and the complex rules of chivalry. Their keen observation skills and authority were essential for maintaining the integrity of the lists. This is a mainstream historical fact. Heralds played a significant role in organising and officiating medieval tournaments, including verifying identities and monitoring conduct. Before a joust, heralds would meticulously inspect the armour and lances of the knights. They would scrutinise the heraldic devices displayed on shields and surcoats, verifying a knight's identity and ensuring they were not competing under false pretences, a callback to Section 5, remember? If a knight attempted to display arms that were not rightfully his, or that were recently altered, the herald would be the first to spot the deception. Their knowledge of heraldry was so extensive that they could often recognise even subtle deviations or newly adopted, unapproved symbols. You can almost feel the cold dread of a cheating knight as a herald's discerning gaze falls upon his suspiciously new-looking shield. It's like a medieval airport security agent who can tell you're lying just by the way you fidget. During the joust itself, heralds position themselves strategically around the lists, their eyes sharp, watching for any sign of foul play. They would look for instances of doctored lances, remember section 7, noting if a lance shattered suspiciously or delivered an unusually violent impact. They were also vigilant against any form of spectator interference, as discussed in section 11, shouting commands to keep the crowd at bay and identifying unruly elements. Their job required constant vigilance and an intimate understanding of the nuances of legitimate combat versus deliberate deception. The authority of the heralds was considerable, backed by the hosting lord. Disregarding a herald's command or attempting to bribe one was a severe offence. Their pronouncements were often treated as official judgments, and their reports to the marshals and judges carried significant weight. A herald's word could make or break a knight's reputation, especially if he was accused of cheating. A quirky tidbit is that heralds often wore specific badges or chains of office signifying their royal or noble patronage. These visible symbols of authority ensured that their commands were instantly recognised and respected by even the most unruly knight or commoner. It's like having a uniform that silently screams, "I am important, and you should listen to me." Historians still argue whether the herald's primary function was purely administrative and ceremonial, or if they also wielded significant investigative and punitive power, acting as de facto medieval detectives in the lists. Regardless, their omnipresent enforcer's eye was a powerful deterrent against cheating. The very knowledge that such discerning eyes were watching every move added a crucial layer of accountability, making the prospect of being caught in a dishonest act a very real and terrifying possibility. From the sharp, scrutinising eyes of the heralds, your focus now shifts to the ultimate authority figures on the tournament field, the marshal's authority, acting as order's guardians. Imagine a group of seasoned knights, perhaps even royalty or high-ranking nobles themselves, mounted and heavily armed, moving with purpose through the lists, their very presence embodying the power to enforce the rules and deliver swift justice. It's like having the full SWAT team on standby at a sports event, but they also get to decide the winner and mete out punishment on the spot. The marshal's authority was paramount within the tournament grounds. Often appointed by the hosting lord or monarch, these individuals were typically experienced and highly respected knights themselves, chosen for their military prowess, their deep understanding of knightly combat, and their unimpeachable honour. They were the chief officials, responsible for overall organisation, ensuring the smooth flow of events, and, crucially, maintaining strict discipline and fairness. They were the Supreme Order's guardians, their word almost law within the confines of the lists. This is a mainstream historical fact. Tournament marshals held significant authority over the conduct and enforcement of rules within the lists. The marshals wielded considerable power. They could halt a joust, intervene in a melee, settle disputes, and most importantly, directly address accusations of cheating. When a herald, remember section 12, reported a suspected infraction, or when a knight accused his opponent of foul play, it was the marshals who would conduct the immediate investigation. They would inspect armour, recall section 6, examine lances, from section 7, and question witnesses, including squires and other knights. Their judgment was often final on the field, though very serious cases might be referred to the hosting lord or a formal court. You can almost feel the tension in the air as a marshal approaches a suspected cheater, his gaze unyielding, his presence a silent threat of dire consequences. It's like when the head coach walks onto the field after a controversial play. Everyone knows something big is about to happen. Their responsibilities also extended to the safety of the participants, though this was often secondary to maintaining order and honour. They ensured that combatants adhered to agreed-upon weapon types, blunted lances for jousts for instance, although even these could inflict grievous injury. They would also supervise the collection of ransoms from defeated knights, ensuring fair play in the financial aspects of the tournament. Any attempt by a defeated knight to escape without paying his ransom, a problem exacerbated by disguised identities as we discussed in section 5, would be met with the full force of the marshal's authority. The very visual presence of the marshals, often riding impressive war horses and wearing distinctive attire or identifying symbols, served as a powerful deterrent against cheating. No knight, no matter how audacious, would openly defy a marshal on the field, knowing that immediate and severe repercussions would follow. Their authority was rooted in both their personal manner and the delegated power of the sovereign. A quirky tidbit is that in some accounts, marshals were sometimes required to pay for any damage caused to the lists or equipment if they failed to properly supervise an event, giving them a direct financial incentive to ensure order and prevent cheating. It's like a modern event manager being personally fined if a fight breaks out at their concert. It adds a whole new layer of motivation. Historians still argue whether the marshals' primary role was to enforce specific codified rules, or if they primarily acted as arbiters of chivalric conduct, relying on their own judgment and the prevailing unwritten customs, remember Section 3. Regardless, their authority as Order's guardians was indisputable, making them the crucial bulwark against dishonesty in the thrilling yet perilous world of medieval tournaments. Their power to instantly determine guilt and apply on-the-spot punishments was a critical element in the system of deterring and punishing fraud. From the decisive authority of the marshals, your attention now sharpens on the final arbiters of fairness, the judge's verdict, and the moment when justice's scales truly tipped for a suspected cheater. Imagine the hushed anticipation, the nervous glances, as a panel of esteemed nobles or seasoned knights, having heard the evidence, deliberated on the fate of a knight accused of dishonourable conduct. It's like a medieval Supreme Court, but instead of legal briefs, they're weighing honour against deceit, and the judgment is often delivered in front of 1,000 witnesses. The judge's verdict was the culmination of the investigative process initiated by the heralds, remember Section 12, and marshals from Section 13. In many tournaments, especially the larger, more prestigious ones, a formal panel of judges would be appointed. These were typically highly respected figures, often counts, dukes, or even the monarch themselves, or knights of unimpeachable reputation. Their role was to interpret the rules, weigh the evidence, and deliver a definitive ruling on disputes, particularly those involving accusations of cheating. Their decisions were considered final and binding within the context of the tournament, representing the collective voice of honour and justice. This is a mainstream historical fact. Formal panels of judges or arbiters were often appointed in medieval tournaments to settle disputes and rule on infractions. When a knight was accused of cheating, perhaps using doctored lances, call Section 7, or having drugged horses, as discussed in Section 8, or even attempting to operate under disguised identities, remember Section 5, the evidence would be presented to the judges. This might involve physical examination of equipment, testimony from witnesses, including heralds, marshals, and even other knights or squires, and sometimes even the accused knight's own defence. The judges would then carefully deliberate, striving to ensure justice's scales were balanced, giving due consideration to both the accusation and the knight's standing and reputation. You can almost feel the tension in the air, thick with the potential for either exoneration or utter ruin. It's like waiting for the results of a very public, very high-stakes lie detector test, where the consequences are far more severe than just embarrassment. The process of delivering the judge's verdict was often highly ceremonial. The accused knight might be brought before the judges, his fate hanging in the balance. The pronouncement of guilt, if it came, was not just a legal decision but a moral condemnation, publicly stripping the knight of his honour. Conversely, an acquittal would restore his reputation, allowing him to continue competing with his name cleared. The public nature of the verdict underscored its importance, acting as a powerful lesson for all present on the severe consequences of dishonourable conduct. The judges, by virtue of their status and experience, were expected to be impartial, acting without favour or prejudice. Their integrity was as crucial to the fairness of the tournament as the knights' adherence to the chivalric code. Any suspicion of corruption or unfair judgment on their part would have severely damaged the legitimacy of the entire event. A quirky tidbit is that in some early tournaments, the host lord himself might act as the sole judge, making decisions on the spot, often based on his personal observations and biases, which could lead to highly subjective and sometimes unfair outcomes. This highlights the gradual evolution towards more formalised judicial panels in later periods. It's like having a referee who's also the team owner, and they're not even trying to hide their favouritism. Historians still argue whether the judicial process in medieval tournaments was truly aimed at achieving objective justice, or if it was often influenced by political considerations, social status, and personal connections among the nobility. Regardless, the public act of rendering a judge's verdict was paramount to maintaining the perceived integrity of the tournament. The formal judgment, declaring a knight guilty of cheating, was the essential precursor to the harsh and often humiliating punishments that would follow, ensuring that justice's scales not only weighed the truth but also visibly enforced the moral order of chivalry. From the solemn pronouncements of the judge's verdict, your journey now leads to the very first rung on the ladder of medieval tournament justice, the first offence, and the often merciful, yet still ominous, warning's shadow it cast. Imagine a knight, perhaps having bent a rule through carelessness rather than malice, receiving a stern reprimand, a public admonition that serves as a grim foreshadowing of far harsher consequences should he transgress again. It's like getting a traffic ticket instead of losing your license, a clear message that you're being watched and the next mistake will cost you dearly. For minor infractions, or for a knight suspected of cheating but without conclusive proof, the first offence typically resulted in a relatively lighter punishment. This wasn't about immediate ruin, but about correction and deterrence. The most common penalty was a formal rebuke, delivered publicly by a marshal or herald. Remember their roles from sections 12 and 13, in front of the assembled crowd. This was not a quiet word in the ear, it was a loud, clear declaration, ensuring that the knight's minor transgression was known to all present. This is a mainstream historical fact. Initial or minor infractions in medieval tournaments often resulted in public reprimands rather than severe penalties. The purpose of this warning's shadow was multifaceted. Firstly, it served as a direct admonition to the offending knight, making it unequivocally clear that his conduct was unacceptable and that further breaches would not be tolerated. Secondly, it acted as a public demonstration of the tournament officials' vigilance and commitment to fairness. By openly addressing even minor rule-breaking, they reinforced the integrity of the event and the chivalric code for all participants and spectators. You can almost feel the prickle of shame on the knight's face as all eyes turn to him, his honour slightly tarnished, even if temporarily. It's like being called out by your mum in front of all your friends, deeply embarrassing, but also a potent reminder not to mess up again. These initial penalties might also include a temporary suspension from the current day's events, forcing the knight to sit out a joust or a melee. While not as damaging as expulsion, it still meant a loss of opportunity for glory, prizes, and further accumulation of mana. For a knight eager to prove himself, even a temporary sidelining could be a significant blow. It's like being benched in a crucial game. You're still on the team, but everyone knows you messed up. The nature of the offence often dictated the severity of the initial warning. A knight who accidentally broke a rule regarding equipment, perhaps a slightly oversized shield that wasn't deliberately weighted armour from Section 6, might receive a verbal warning and a requirement to rectify the issue. A knight suspected of trying to conceal his disguised identity, from Section 5, might face a more pointed interrogation and a stern caution. The intent behind the transgression, if discernible, played a significant role. A quirky tidbit is that some chronicles record instances where a knight, after receiving a first warning, would ritually purify his armour or equipment in a public display, perhaps by having squires meticulously polish it, or anointing it with holy water, to visually reinforce his commitment to renewed honourable conduct. It's like performing a very public apology dance, but with chainmail. Historians still argue whether these initial warnings were genuinely effective in deterring future cheating, or if they merely served as a symbolic gesture, with more serious offenders often repeating their transgressions. Regardless, the concept of a first offence carrying a distinct warning's shadow demonstrates a tiered system of justice, aiming to educate and correct before resorting to the devastating, reputation-shattering punishments that awaited repeat or egregious cheaters. This initial leniency, however, was a luxury rarely afforded twice. From the fleeting mercy of a warning, your journey now descends to a more severe consequence: expulsion, and the profound shames branding it left upon a knight. Imagine a knight, stripped of his right to compete, publicly escorted from the lists, his exclusion not just a temporary inconvenience but a permanent mark of dishonour that followed him wherever he went. It's like being permanently blacklisted from every exclusive club, but the club is medieval society, and the bouncers are armoured knights. When a knight committed a serious offence, or was a repeat offender after receiving a first offence warning, remember Section 15, the marshals and judges, as discussed in Section 14, had the authority to impose expulsion from the tournament. This wasn't a temporary ban for a single event. It was often a permanent exclusion from all future tournaments hosted by that lord, or even by allied lords. The act of being expelled was a profound public humiliation, a visible sign that the knight's honour had been irrevocably stained. This is a mainstream historical fact. Expulsion from tournaments was a common and severe punishment for serious infractions or repeat cheating. The process of expulsion was often highly ceremonial, designed to maximise the public spectacle of the knight's disgrace. The offending knight would be formally led out of the lists, often on foot, stripped of his helmet or even his gauntlets, signifying his loss of privilege. His heraldic banner, which was usually displayed proudly, might be lowered or even dragged in the dirt. This was not just a practical removal from the competition, it was a deliberate act of public shaming, a clear message to all present that this knight had forfeited his right to participate in honourable combat. You can almost feel the burning humiliation, the sting of 1,000 eyes, as he makes that long, solitary walk of shame, knowing his name will forever be associated with deceit. It's like being forced to wear a sign that says, "I cheated," at a sporting event. But the sign is your reputation. The shame's branding that accompanied expulsion was perhaps more damaging than any physical penalty. For a medieval knight, whose identity and social standing were so intricately tied to his honour and ability to participate in martial displays, being barred from tournaments was akin to professional ruin. It signalled to potential patrons, allies, and even eligible ladies that he was untrustworthy and lacked the fundamental virtues expected of his class. Other honourable knights might refuse to joust with him even outside formal tournaments, and his invitations to social gatherings would likely dwindle. This brand of shame could extend beyond the individual. If the knight was representing a particular lord or a family, their reputation might also be sullied by his dishonourable conduct. It created a ripple effect, underscoring the collective nature of honour in medieval society. A quirky tidbit is that in some accounts, a knight's expulsion might be announced with a blare of trumpets, but not the celebratory kind. Instead, it would be a discordant, mournful fanfare, designed to underscore the gravity of his disgrace. It's like a medieval Walk of Atonement, but with a soundtrack composed purely of public disdain. Historians still argue whether the long-term social impact of expulsion was genuinely career-ending for most knights, or if some were able to eventually rehabilitate their reputations through other means, such as military service or acts of great piety. Regardless, the immediate and profound nature of the shame's branding associated with being expelled from tournaments was a powerful deterrent. It was a clear and public declaration that the knight had broken faith with the chivalric code, and for that, he was permanently cast out from the brotherhood of honourable combat. From the pervasive humiliation of expulsion, your journey now examines a more tangible, yet still acutely painful, consequence for cheating: fines, and the direct sting they delivered to a knight's purse's pain. Imagine a knight, having just gambled his honour and lost, now facing not just public disgrace, but also the stripping away of his hard-won wealth, leaving him financially diminished and perhaps even vulnerable. It's like getting caught cheating on your taxes, and instead of just a bad reputation, you're also left with an empty bank account. While punishments for cheating in medieval tournaments often focused on reputation and honour, a very practical and immediate consequence was the imposition of fines. For many knights, especially those of lesser means who relied on tournament winnings for their livelihood, this financial penalty could be devastating. It directly translated a moral failing into tangible purse's pain, a very real and often inescapable consequence. This is a mainstream historical fact. Monetary fines were a common punishment for various infractions in medieval tournaments. The scale of the fines would vary depending on the severity of the cheating, the status of the offending knight, and the discretion of the marshals and judges. Remember them from section 13 and 14. A minor infraction, perhaps related to a slightly oversized horse, might incur a relatively small fine. However, for serious acts of deception, such as using doctored lances, recalled from section 7, or even worse, being caught attempting to employ magical charms, from section 9, the fines could be substantial. They might amount to a significant portion of a knight's annual income, or even exceed it, forcing him into debt. You can almost hear the quiet despair of a knight realizing his victory, secured through illicit means, has now cost him far more than he ever stood to gain honestly. It's like winning a lottery ticket, only to find out it's cursed, and all the money goes straight to your ex. Beyond simply losing potential prize money, the fine could also be a direct penalty imposed by the hosting lord, intended to compensate for the disruption caused by the cheating, or simply as a punitive measure. These funds might then be distributed to the tournament officials, or perhaps even to the knight who was unfairly disadvantaged by the cheating. This reinforced the idea that cheating not only broke the rules, but also directly harmed others, requiring financial restitution. For knights who relied on tournaments to build their wealth and secure their future, the purse's pain inflicted by fines could halt their social ascent and even lead to financial ruin. It might prevent them from acquiring new armour, maintaining their retinue of squires and servants, or participating in future campaigns and tournaments, effectively ending their knightly career. The public humiliation of expulsion, remember section 16, was compounded by a very real economic blow, a dual assault on their standing. A quirky tidbit is that some tournament contracts explicitly stipulated the exact fines for various offences, giving knights a clear, albeit grim, understanding of the financial risks associated with cheating. This contractual clarity, however, didn't always deter the desperate or the overly ambitious. It's like a medieval menu of penalties, where the prices are exorbitant and the dishes served cold. Historians still argue whether the imposition of fines was primarily intended as a form of direct financial punishment, or if its main purpose was to ensure the economic viability of tournaments by providing a revenue stream for hosts and officials. Regardless, the direct impact on a knight's wealth meant that purse's pain was a very real and effective deterrent. The threat of losing hard-earned coin, in addition to losing face, added a powerful practical dimension to the penalties for undermining the integrity of chivalric combat. From the direct financial blow of fines, your journey now moves to another material consequence for cheating: confiscation, and the very public stripping of the spoils of deceit. Imagine a knight not only losing his reputation and his money, but also having his precious armour, his warhorse, and even his weapons seized, leaving him utterly destitute and exposed before the eyes of all. It's like getting caught cheating at a car race, and not only do you lose the race, but they also take your car, your racing suit, and your helmet, leaving you to walk home in your underwear. Confiscation was a severe and highly visible punishment for knights found guilty of egregious cheating in medieval tournaments. Beyond monetary fines, remember section 17, the marshals and judges, as discussed in section 14, had the authority to seize the very tools of a knight's trade: his armour, his warhorse, his weapons, and any other valuables he had brought to the tournament. This punishment directly attacked a knight's material wealth and his ability to continue his profession, turning his ill-gotten gains into the spoils of deceit for the tournament host or the wronged party. This is a mainstream historical fact. Confiscation of armour, horses and weapons was a severe penalty for proven cheating in medieval tournaments. The act of confiscation was often carried out publicly, emphasising the knight's disgrace. Imagine a defeated knight standing there, watching his prized destrier, his gleaming breastplate, and his sharp sword being led away or carried off by tournament officials. For a knight, his armour was not just protective gear, it was a symbol of his identity, his status and his lineage. His horse was his trusted companion in battle and tournament. To lose these possessions was not merely an economic blow, it was a profound spiritual and social degradation. You can almost feel the chill of exposure, the raw vulnerability of a man stripped of everything that defined him. It's like having your entire online inventory deleted after you're caught using hacks in a video game, but in real life, and with actual very expensive horses. This form of punishment was particularly effective because it directly impacted a knight's means of livelihood and future prospects. Without a warhorse, he could not joust or fight effectively in battle. Without armour, he was unprotected. Without weapons, he was disarmed, literally and metaphorically. It effectively ended his career as a knight, reducing him to a state of penury and helplessness. The goods seized would often be awarded to the knight who had been cheated, or they might be added to the hosting lord's treasury, further incentivising vigilance against cheating. The spectacle of a knight's equipment being seized served as a potent warning to others. It underscored the seriousness with which cheating was viewed, and demonstrated that the authorities were willing to impose crippling penalties to maintain the integrity of the chivalric code. It also ensured that the cheater gained no material benefit from his dishonest actions, transforming his attempts at ill-gotten gain into personal ruin. A quirky tidbit is that in some extremely rare and severe cases, a knight's very spurs, a symbol of his knighthood, might be publicly hacked off his heels with a butcher's axe as part of the confiscation and degradation ceremony. This was a symbolic act of utter defilement, visually reinforcing his complete stripping of knightly status. It's like losing your badge, your gun, and your dignity all at once, but with more medieval brutality. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of confiscation was to punish the cheater financially and professionally, or if it was more deeply rooted in the symbolic act of stripping away the physical manifestations of a knight's honour. Regardless, the public seizure of spoils of deceit was a powerful and humiliating consequence, ensuring that a knight's attempt to gain advantage through dishonesty resulted in a complete and visible loss of both wealth and standing, marking him forever as one who betrayed the sacred trust of the lists. From the visible forfeiture of material possessions through confiscation, your journey now moves to an even more brutal assault on a knight's public standing. Public humiliation, often involving the grim reality of the stocks and shame. Imagine a knight, once celebrated and admired, now bound and exposed in a public square, subjected to the jeers, insults, and even the flung refuse of the very commoners he was sworn to protect. It's like being forced to wear a giant dunce cap in the middle of Times Square, while everyone throws rotten fruit at you. For particularly egregious acts of cheating, especially those that deeply offended the sensibilities of honour and fairness, tournament officials, including marshals and judges as we've discussed, could sentence a knight to a period of public humiliation. This was not merely a consequence, it was a deliberate and theatrical punishment designed to utterly break the knight's spirit and send a powerful message to all who witnessed it. The most common form of this punishment involved being placed in the stocks and shame. This is a mainstream historical fact. Public humiliation, including the use of stocks, was a punitive measure for various offences in medieval society, including dishonourable conduct. The stocks were a wooden device, typically with holes for the feet and sometimes the hands and neck, designed to trap and immobilise a person in a standing or sitting position. Once secured, the knight, stripped of his armour and perhaps even his finest clothes, would be exposed to the elements and, more painfully, to the indignity of public scorn. He might be placed in the marketplace, outside the tournament grounds, or in another prominent public location for hours, or even days, on end. You can almost feel the biting cold or the oppressive heat, the gnawing hunger, but above all, the crushing weight of public derision. It's a bit like being caught on camera doing something incredibly embarrassing, and then that video goes viral, but it's real life, and there's no delete button. The shame was the primary weapon here. Commoners, who might otherwise admire or fear knights, were given free rein to express their contempt. They might shout insults, mock the knight's supposed bravery, or even throw dirt, rotten vegetables, or animal dung at him. For a knight, whose entire identity was built on respect, honour and social superiority, being treated worse than a common criminal by the very populace he was meant to rule and protect was a profound psychological torment. It was a complete inversion of his social order, designed to leave an indelible mark on his psyche and his reputation. This form of punishment also served as a powerful deterrent. The prospect of such utter social degradation, far beyond any financial or physical pain, was a terrifying thought for any knight. It guaranteed that his dishonourable act would not be forgotten, making him a living example of the severe consequences of violating the chivalric code. It also reinforced the moral authority of the tournament and the ruling elite, showing that even those of noble birth were not above severe punishment for their transgressions. A quirky tidbit is that sometimes, particularly vindictive crowds might even compose crude, mocking songs or rhymes about the disgraced knight while he was in the stocks, which would then be sung and spread far and wide, ensuring his humiliation endured even after his physical release. It's like having a viral diss track written about you, but it's a medieval ballad that follows you for life. Historians still argue whether the frequency of such extreme public humiliation for cheating knights was a common occurrence, or if it was reserved for exceptionally heinous and highly publicised cases, serving primarily as a symbolic warning rather than a routine punishment. Regardless, the chilling prospect of being subjected to the stocks and shame undoubtedly hung over every knight contemplating dishonest tactics, cementing it as one of the most feared consequences for undermining the integrity of the tournament and betraying the chivalric code. From the public torment of the stocks and shame, your journey now descends to one of the most profound and symbolically devastating punishments a knight could face. The degradation ceremony, a chilling ritual known as nightly stripping. Imagine a scene where a knight, once adorned with the symbols of his exalted status, is systematically divested of every emblem of his knighthood, his honour visibly peeled away layer by painstaking layer before a silent, solemn crowd. It's like watching a superhero being stripped of their powers and costume, but in a very real, very public, and utterly soul-crushing way. The degradation ceremony was reserved for the most grievous offences against honour, particularly for knights convicted of profound treachery, cowardice, or, in our context, repeated and unrepentant cheating that deeply violated the chivalric code. It wasn't merely a dismissal, it was a ritualistic unmaking of a knight, a public obliteration of his very identity. This chilling ritual, often taking place on the tournament grounds or in a court, was designed to be profoundly impactful, a vivid lesson to all present on the absolute imperative of honour. This is a mainstream historical fact. Degradation ceremonies involving the stripping of knightly symbols were performed for knights convicted of severe dishonour. The process of knightly stripping was meticulously orchestrated to maximise the psychological and social impact. The condemned knight would be brought before his peers, often in full armour. Then, one by one, the symbols of his knighthood would be removed by heralds or even executioners. His helmet would be taken, followed by his gauntlets, his sword, his spurs — remember the quirky tidbit from section 18 about having them hacked off — and finally, his shield. The heraldic devices on his shield, which represented his lineage and identity, might be smeared with filth, dragged through the mud, or even broken. You can almost feel the cold wind on his now exposed skin, the raw vulnerability of a man whose entire being is being systematically dismantled before his eyes. It's like every single one of your online achievements being deleted one by one, while 1,000 people watch you live stream it. As each piece was removed, a solemn pronouncement might be made, detailing the knight's crimes and declaring him unworthy, disloyal, or false. Sometimes water would be poured over his head, symbolising the washing away of his knightly vows, or he might be publicly cursed. The armour itself might then be broken or defiled, ensuring it could never again be worn in honourable combat. This ritual left the knight not just dishonoured, but literally deknighted, stripped of his very social essence. He was reduced to the status of a commoner, or even worse, a pariah. The purpose of this brutal ceremony was twofold: to punish the individual severely and to serve as an undeniable deterrent for others. It was a public execution of reputation, designed to instill profound fear and respect for the chivalric code. No knight, no matter how ambitious or desperate, could contemplate such a fate without a shudder. The shame was absolute, complete, and utterly indelible, far worse than any physical injury sustained in the lists. A quirky tidbit is that some chronicles describe a knight's effigy, a dummy representing him, being hanged or dragged through the streets after the ceremony, further extending the public disgrace and making the shame resonate even after the living knight was removed from view. It's like having your personal shame turned into a travelling exhibit, ensuring everyone, everywhere, knows your dirty laundry. Historians still argue whether the degradation ceremony was a truly common occurrence, or if it was mainly a symbolic threat, reserved for the most extreme cases to underscore the severity of knightly dishonour. Regardless, its existence and the detailed accounts of its rituals reveal the ultimate punishment for breaching the sacred trust of knighthood. Knightly stripping was the final devastating blow, ensuring that a cheater would not only lose the tournament, but also his very identity and place within the honourable society he had betrayed. From the agonising depths of the degradation ceremony, your journey now highlights a very specific and symbolic act of public disgrace: the broken lance serving as a potent symbol of dishonour. Imagine the hushed reverence for the lance, the very instrument of a knight's glory, now deliberately and publicly snapped. Its splintered shaft a permanent visual indictment of a knight's betrayal. It's like breaking a trophy in half right in front of the person who won it by cheating. But in this case, the trophy is also a weapon, and the person is a knight. The lance was not just a piece of wood in a joust, it was imbued with profound symbolic meaning. It represented a knight's skill, his courage, and his ability to uphold his vows. A well-couched lance, cleanly broken on an opponent's shield, was the epitome of success and honourable combat. Therefore, the deliberate act of breaking a knight's lance as a punishment was an incredibly powerful and public symbol of dishonour. It was a direct affront to his martial prowess and his knightly integrity. This is a mainstream historical fact. The breaking of a knight's lance or shield was a symbolic act of disgrace for dishonourable conduct. This particular punishment was often administered following a severe transgression, especially one that involved manipulation of equipment, like using a doctored lance, a tactic we explored in Section 7, remember? Or if the knight was definitively caught with weighted armour from Section 6. The marshals or heralds, their crucial roles discussed in Sections 12 and 13, respectively, would oversee the ritual. The offending knight's own lance, or sometimes a new one prepared for the purpose, would be ceremonially snapped in two over a knee, against a post, or even by an executioner. You can almost hear the sharp crack of the wood, a sound that would echo through the crowd, carrying with it the unmistakable message of disgrace. It's like a medieval mic drop, but instead of a microphone, it's a giant stick, and instead of just dropping it, they're smashing it. The purpose of the broken lance was multifaceted. Firstly, it served as a practical disarmament, rendering the knight unable to compete further in the tournament. Secondly, and more importantly, it was a visible and undeniable public condemnation. Everyone present, from the highest noble to the lowliest peasant, would immediately understand the gravity of the knight's transgression. It was a tangible mark of his disgrace, immediately recognisable even to those who couldn't hear the formal pronouncements of his guilt. This symbolism was deeply effective, because it twisted a positive sign into a negative one. A broken lance, when achieved honourably in the joust, signified a powerful impact and success. But when deliberately broken by officials, it represented a broken oath, a shattered reputation, and a failed test of honour. It was a stark visual reminder of the knight's betrayal of the chivalric code. Remember Section 2. A quirky tidbit is that in some very rare and extreme cases, if a knight was convicted of treason or other capital crimes that brought utter dishonour, not only his lance but his shield and even his helmet might be ceremonially defaced or destroyed, signifying a complete obliteration of his knightly persona. It's like having your entire online profile deleted and then your physical belongings smashed in front of everyone. Historians still argue whether the broken lance was a standalone punishment or often accompanied other forms of disgrace, such as expulsion from Section 16 or a degradation ceremony, as discussed in Section 20. Regardless, its potent imagery as a symbol of dishonour made it a terrifying prospect for any knight. It was a public and permanent declaration that the knight had been found wanting, his integrity shattered as irrevocably as the wooden shaft in the marshal's hands. From the symbolic destruction of a knight's emblem of combat, your journey now turns to a far more tangible and restrictive consequence: imprisonment and the grim reality of the dungeon's gloom. Imagine a knight, once free to ride and fight, now confined within cold, damp stone walls, stripped of his liberty, his fate hanging in the balance perhaps for weeks, months, or even years. It's like being grounded for cheating on your chores, but instead of losing video game privileges, you lose sunlight, fresh air, and pretty much everything else. For serious acts of cheating, particularly those that involve deliberate malice, significant harm to an opponent, or a repeated pattern of dishonesty, the judges and marshals, whose authority we explored in Sections 13 and 14, had the power to order imprisonment. This was a profound deprivation of liberty, a stark contrast to the freedom and mobility that defined a knight's existence. The duration of confinement varied widely, depending on the severity of the offence and the discretion of the hosting lord, but it could range from a few days to several years. This is a mainstream historical fact. Imprisonment was a punitive measure used for various offences, including serious breaches of conduct in medieval society. The conditions of medieval prisons, often little more than subterranean cells within castles or fortified towns, were harsh. You can almost feel the damp, bone-chilling air, the gnawing hunger, and the oppressive silence broken only by the drip of water or the skittering of rats. The dungeon's gloom was not just a lack of light, it was a psychological torment, a constant reminder of freedom lost and honour forfeited. For a knight accustomed to the open air of battlefields and the comforts of noble halls, Such confinement would have been a particularly cruel and crushing experience. It's like being forced to live in a windowless broom closet, only colder and with less personal space and the occasional spider. Beyond the physical discomfort, imprisonment had significant social and financial repercussions. A knight in prison could not earn prize money, participate in military campaigns, or attend court, effectively halting his career and severing his social ties. His family might have to pay for his upkeep, or even a ransom to secure his release, adding financial strain to their burden. His reputation, already sullied by the accusation of cheating, would be further tarnished by his incarceration, solidifying his image as a dishonourable individual. The threat of imprisonment served as a powerful deterrent. While not as publicly humiliating as the stocks and shame, recall section 19, or as symbolically devastating as the degradation ceremony from section 20, it presented a very real and tangible threat to a knight's most cherished possession, his freedom. The prospect of wasting away in a dark cell with no immediate end in sight was a terrifying thought for men whose lives were defined by action and mobility. A quirky tidbit is that while most prisons were grim, some higher status prisoners, including knights, might be afforded slightly better conditions, such as a private room or the allowance of books if their families paid extra. This created a medieval VIP dungeon experience, proving that even in punishment, social hierarchy often found a way to assert itself. Historians still argue whether imprisonment for cheating was a relatively rare occurrence, reserved for the most serious and violent infractions, or if it was a more common punishment for a range of dishonourable acts, with varying durations based on severity. Regardless, the chilling reality of the dungeon's gloom offered a stark reminder that violating the chivalric code in the lists could lead to a knight's liberty being stripped away, making him a prisoner of his own deceit and a living testament to the unforgiving nature of medieval justice. From the cold confines of the dungeon, your journey now veers into a truly horrifying territory. Physical mutilation and the grotesque reality of the body's scars that some cheating knights endured. Imagine a punishment so extreme that it permanently disfigured a knight, not just stripping his honour but irrevocably altering his very form, a living, agonising testament to his transgression. It's like a medieval version of a permanent bad tattoo, but instead of a misspelled word, it's a missing finger or an ear, and it hurts a lot more. While not as common as fines or imprisonment, for the most egregious acts of cheating that cause severe harm to an opponent or profoundly disgrace the chivalric code, medieval justice, with its often brutal tendencies, could resort to physical mutilation. These were punishments designed not only to inflict pain and public shame, but also to permanently mark the offender, ensuring that his crime was forever etched onto his own flesh. The severity of such penalties reflected the perceived gravity of the betrayal. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval law and custom, though varying by region, sometimes prescribed physical mutilation for serious offences, including those related to honour and combat. The forms of physical mutilation could be varied and horrifying. Losing a hand or fingers might be the penalty for someone who tampered with equipment, such as doctored lances, remember section 7, or weighted armour, from section 6, as a symbolic removal of the offending limb that performed the dishonest act. An eye might be put out for a knight who deliberately aimed for an opponent's unprotected face, or a tongue cut out for someone who spread false boasts, from section 10, or slandered an opponent unjustly. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were often symbolically linked to the nature of the crime, acting as a grim living lesson for the perpetrator and a terrifying warning for others. You can almost feel the phantom limb pain, the searing agony of a wound that will never truly heal, a constant visceral reminder of a moment of dishonour. It's significantly more painful than stubbing your toe, and a lot harder to explain at parties. The body's scars served as an undeniable, permanent brand of disgrace. Unlike fines or imprisonment, which could eventually be overcome or forgotten, a physical mutilation was a lifelong mark. It made it impossible for the knight to hide his past, or to re-enter society without his crime being immediately evident. His disfigurement served as a constant public reminder of his dishonourable conduct, ensuring his shame endured long after the tournament fanfare faded. For a knight whose physical prowess and noble appearance was central to his identity, such disfigurement was a fate worse than death for many. The application of such punishments was usually carried out publicly, increasing the deterrent effect. The sight of a once proud knight being so brutally punished would instill fear and reinforce the absolute adherence to the rules of honour. It demonstrated the ruthlessness with which medieval society protected its most cherished values, even at the cost of human suffering. A quirky tidbit is that some legal texts of the period would specify the exact limb or body part to be mutilated for particular offences, almost like a gruesome menu of punishments. This highly codified brutality shows the deliberate rather than arbitrary nature of these extreme penalties. It's like a medieval legal code that details exactly which finger you lose for pressing the wrong button. Historians still argue whether instances of physical mutilation for tournament cheating were truly widespread, or if they were largely confined to exceptional cases that sought to make a powerful example. Regardless, the chilling prospect of enduring such body scars undoubtedly represented the apex of punitive measures, a terrifying deterrent that reinforced the absolute sanctity of honour and fair play in the high-stakes world of medieval tournaments. From the horrific prospect of physical mutilation, your journey now considers a very specific and symbolic form of disfigurement, loss of hand, representing the severe oath's penalty. Imagine a knight whose very identity is tied to his sword hand and his ability to hold a lance, facing the agonizing punishment of having that essential limb removed. A permanent physical reminder of a broken sacred vow. It's like a medieval surgeon performing an unconsensual, painful act of public shaming, but instead of for health, it's for honour. The loss of hand was an extremely severe form of physical mutilation, as we discussed in section 23, reserved for crimes that were considered direct betrayals of trust or explicit violations of sacred oaths. In the context of medieval tournaments, this could be the ultimate oath's penalty for a knight who was deemed to have deliberately and maliciously cheated, especially if his deception involved the very hands that wielded his weapons or manipulated his equipment. This punishment was not merely about inflicting pain, it was deeply symbolic, aiming to incapacitate the offending limb, and by extension, the knight's very essence as a warrior and a man of honour. This is a mainstream historical fact. The loss of a hand or limb was a prescribed punishment for serious crimes, including perjury and theft in medieval law. Consider the significance. A knight's oath of fealty, his word of honour, and his pledge to uphold chivalry were often accompanied by solemn gestures, placing his hand on a holy relic or swearing on the Gospels. To then use that same hand to commit an act of fraud, such as using doctored lances, remember section 7, or tampering with weighted armour, from section 6, was seen as a profound defilement of his sacred vows. The removal of the hand thus symbolised the stripping away of his ability to perform knightly duties and, more profoundly, the physical manifestation of his broken oath. You can almost feel the phantom grip of a sword that will never be held, the searing memory of the blade that severed connection to his very purpose. It's like a sculptor removing the hand from their own masterpiece because it created something ugly. The psychological impact of the loss of hand would have been immense. Beyond the agonising pain and the risk of infection in a pre-antibiotic era, the knight would be permanently disabled, unable to fight, ride, or even perform many basic daily tasks without assistance. He would be rendered utterly dependent, a stark contrast to the independent, self-reliant image of a medieval knight. His body's scars, recalled from section 23, would be a constant, visible testament to his profound disgrace, a mark of utter ignominy that no amount of time could erase. Such a punishment was typically carried out in a highly public setting, often near the tournament grounds or in the town square, ensuring maximum deterrent effect. The gruesome spectacle would serve as a chilling warning to all who witnessed it, reinforcing the unwavering commitment of medieval society to the ideals of honour and the severe consequences of violating them. A quirky tidbit is that in some legal systems, a thief's hand might be cut off even for repeated minor offences, highlighting the medieval emphasis on specific body parts being associated with particular crimes. For a knight, his hand was also intrinsically linked to his chivalric identity, making its loss doubly punitive. It's like if a master chef lost their taste buds as punishment for serving a bad meal. Historians still argue whether the loss of hand was ever directly applied specifically for cheating in a tournament, or if it was a punishment primarily reserved for crimes like perjury, forgery, or theft, with tournament cheating falling under broader categories of dishonourable conduct. Regardless, the threat and concept of such severe physical mutilation for breaking oaths underscores the extreme gravity with which medieval society viewed breaches of trust and honour, demonstrating the potential depths of the oath's penalty for a knight who dared to violate the sacred rules of the lists. From the brutal, symbolic act of losing a hand, your journey now considers a punishment designed for absolute, undeniable public exposure, branding, leaving a permanent mark of shame on a knight. Imagine a knight, once proud of his lineage and achievements, now forced to endure the searing pain of a hot iron, pressing a humiliating symbol onto his flesh, a lifelong, inescapable sign of his deceit. It's like a medieval scarlet letter, but instead of fabric, it's burned onto your skin, and it hurts a whole lot more. Branding was a severe and enduring form of physical punishment in the medieval period, often reserved for thieves, perjurers, or individuals deemed utterly disloyal or dishonourable. For a knight caught in particularly egregious acts of cheating in tournaments, especially those involving repeated offences or widespread public scandal, branding could be the ultimate indelible penalty. This punishment ensured that the knight's transgression was permanently etched onto his body's scars, a concept we touched upon in section 23, making his disgrace visible to anyone who saw him. This is a mainstream historical fact. Branding with hot irons was a recognised form of punishment for various crimes in medieval Europe. The process of branding was deliberately agonising and public. The offending knight would typically be restrained, and a hot iron shaped into a specific symbol of disgrace, perhaps a letter, a cross, or a simple mark of shame, would be pressed onto his skin. Common locations for branding included the forehead, cheek, or hand, chosen precisely because they were visible and difficult to conceal. You can almost feel the searing heat, the smell of burning flesh, and the scream caught in the knight's throat, knowing that this mark would be his companion for the rest of his days. It's like getting a tattoo from a blacksmith using his hottest tools and zero pain meds, and the design is chosen by your worst enemy. The purpose of the permanent mark was multifaceted. Firstly, it served as an immediate and agonising physical punishment. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it was a lifelong badge of dishonour. Unlike fines, remember section 17, or imprisonment, from section 22, which could eventually fade or end, a brand was forever. It ensured that no matter where the knight went, or how he tried to rebuild his life, his past would always be visible. This made it impossible for him to escape his reputation, or to deceive others about his true character. He was a living, breathing testament to the consequences of betraying the chivalric code. For a knight, whose outward appearance, honour and reputation were so intrinsically linked, such disfigurement was a profound social death. It marked him as an outcast, someone fundamentally untrustworthy and unworthy of noble company. Other knights would avoid him, ladies would shun him, and potential patrons would turn him away. His career as a warrior, or even as a respected member of society, was effectively over. A quirky tidbit is that in some specific regions or periods, the shape of the brand might even signify the exact nature of the crime, a letter F for fraud, for example, or a specific symbol for treason. This made the brand a literal public ledger of their crimes. It's like a medieval QR code for scoundrel. Historians still argue whether branding for tournament cheating was a truly common penalty, or if it was more often a threat, with its implementation reserved for exceptional cases of profound and unrepentant fraud. Regardless, the chilling prospect of a permanent mark of shame, delivered through the agony of a hot iron, undoubtedly served as a terrifying deterrent, reinforcing the absolute importance of honour and the unforgiving nature of medieval justice when a knight dared to violate the sacred trust of the lists. From the searing pain of a permanent brand, your journey now moves to a punishment that severed social ties and banished a knight from his familiar world. Banishment and the chilling solitude of exile's coldness. Imagine a knight, once welcomed in noble courts and feasting halls, now cast out, forced to wander without land, title or welcome, forever separated from his homeland and his people. It's like being permanently blocked from every social media platform and every gathering you once belonged to, but in real life, with no way to log back in. Banishment was a severe legal and social penalty in the medieval period, often imposed for serious crimes against the state, or for actions deemed utterly intolerable by a ruling lord. for knights who committed particularly egregious acts of cheating in tournaments, especially those that involved widespread deception, caused significant unrest or deeply shamed the hosting lord. Banishment could be the ultimate form of social ostracization. This punishment stripped the knight of his place in society, leaving him to face the exile's coldness, a life devoid of the warmth of community and belonging. This is a mainstream historical fact. Banishment or exile was a recognised legal punishment in medieval Europe for various serious offences. The act of banishment meant that the knight was formally expelled from the lands of the lord who issued the decree, often with a strict prohibition against his return. This could mean being cast out from a specific duchy, a kingdom, or even a broader collection of allied territories. His property might be confiscated, call Section 18 for the spoils of deceit, his titles revoked, which we'll discuss in Section 27, and his family potentially disinherited, as you'll learn in Section 28, leaving him with nothing. You can almost feel the chill wind of uncertainty as he rides away from everything he has ever known, a pariah in every land he might try to enter. It's like being sent to live on a remote island, but instead of palm trees and beaches, you get suspicion and poverty. For a medieval knight, whose identity, status and security were inextricably linked to his land, his lord and his lineage, exile's coldness was a devastating fate. He would become a man without a master, a rootless wanderer, often reduced to poverty and forced to seek patronage in distant, unfamiliar lands, where his reputation as a disgraced cheater would likely precede him. The shame of his public humiliation, remember Section 19, or his permanent mark from branding, from Section 25, would follow him, making it incredibly difficult to find new opportunities or rebuild his life. The deterrent effect of banishment was immense. It represented a complete rupture from the social fabric, a permanent removal from the very world that gave a knight meaning and purpose. The prospect of living a life of wandering and poverty, constantly under suspicion, was a terrifying thought for men who valued stability and status above all else. It also served the purpose of removing a disruptive element from the realm, ensuring the social order remained intact. A quirky tidbit is that in some cases, a banished knight might be given a specific deadline to leave the territory, and if caught within the boundaries after that date, he could face even harsher penalties, including execution. This added a desperate urgency to their departure, ensuring they truly understood the finality of their sentence. It's like having an eviction notice, but if you don't move out by the deadline, they send in the dragons. Historians still argue whether banishment for tournament cheating was a truly common form of punishment, or if it was mainly reserved for cases where cheating intertwined with broader political disloyalty or challenges to the host's authority. Regardless, the chilling reality of exile's coldness undeniably represented one of the most severe consequences for a knight. It ensured that his betrayal of honour in the lists resulted in a complete and often irreversible separation from his community and his world, making it a powerful and dreaded penalty for those who undermined the sacred trust of chivalry. From the desolate landscape of banishment, your journey now observes a punishment that struck directly at a knight's very essence, the loss of titles and the profound reality of stripped prestige. Imagine a knight, once addressed with reverence as Sir or Lord, now reduced to a mere commoner, his noble lineage publicly disavowed, his status crumbling into dust before his eyes. It's like having all your verified social media badges revoked, but instead of losing a blue check mark, you lose centuries of family history and your place in society. For the most grievous acts of cheating in tournaments, especially those that brought widespread discredit upon the knightly class or directly defied royal authority, the ultimate social penalty could be the loss of titles. This was far more than a financial fine or even imprisonment. It was a complete and irrevocable stripping of a knight's inherited or earned noble status. His stripped prestige left him without the very identity that defined him in medieval society, rendering him a nameless, honourless individual. This is a mainstream historical fact. For severe acts of dishonour or treason, a knight could be formally stripped of his titles and status. This punishment directly assaulted the rigid hierarchy of medieval society. A knight's title, whether simply knight, or a more elevated rank like baron or count, granted him immense privilege, land, power and respect. To have these titles revoked meant being cast out from the aristocratic class, losing all associated rights and lands. the knight would cease to be recognised as noble, effectively becoming a commoner, a fate often considered worse than death by those of noble birth. You can almost feel the crushing weight of identity loss, the emptiness of a name that no longer carries weight, no longer opens doors. It's like going from being royalty to suddenly being told you're just Gary, and Gary has no land. The process of loss of titles was often part of a larger degradation ceremony. Remember section 20, where the knight was publicly deknighted, his spurs removed, and his shield defaced. During this ritual, the heralds, recall their role from section 12, would formally renounce his titles, declaring him to be no longer worthy of his station. This was a solemn and terrifying pronouncement, ensuring that the entire assembled nobility understood the absolute gravity of his transgression and the severity of his fall from grace. It was a dramatic public performance, reinforcing the power of the ruling authority and the unforgiving nature of the chivalric code, from section 2. The impact of stripped prestige was enduring and far-reaching. A knight without titles had no place in the formal structures of feudal society. He could no longer command men, administer justice, or even participate in the very tournaments where he had attempted to cheat. His family might also be affected, as his disgrace could tarnish their name for generations. Coupled with banishment, as explored in section 26, the loss of titles ensured a complete and devastating ruin, socially, economically, and existentially. A quirky tidbit is that sometimes, even after a knight was stripped of his titles, the chroniclers might still refer to him by his former noble name, but always with an added epithet of the disgraced or the false, ensuring his shame was perpetually linked to his former glory. It's like a history textbook consistently reminding you of that one time you tripped over your shoelaces in front of everyone. Historians still argue whether the loss of titles was more frequently applied in cases of political treason against a monarch, or if it was a genuinely common punishment for severe tournament cheating that constituted a profound breach of honour within the knightly order. Regardless, the chilling prospect of his stripped prestige undeniably served as one of the most potent deterrents for any knight contemplating major deceit. It was the ultimate social obliteration, ensuring that a cheater lost not just a contest, but his very identity and all that his noble birth entailed. From the devastating blow of stripped titles, your journey now considers a punishment that reached beyond the individual, casting a dark shadow over generations, disinheritance, and the crushing burden of family's loss. Imagine a knight's treacherous act not only ruining his own future, but also jeopardizing the land's wealth and social standing of his children and descendants, a betrayal that echoed through the very lineage he was meant to uphold. It's like being removed from the family tree, but instead of just your name, it's also your entire inheritance, leaving your kids with nothing but a bad reputation. Disinheritance was one of the most severe and far-reaching penalties for a knight found guilty of profound dishonour, especially if his actions were deemed treasonous or irrevocably stained his family's name. It meant that his heirs, typically his sons, would be prevented from inheriting his lands, titles, which he would have already lost as we discussed in section 27, and wealth. This punishment, often enacted by a sovereign or high lord, ensured that the family's loss was complete, a direct consequence of the patriarch's egregious cheating in tournaments or other acts of profound disloyalty. This is a mainstream historical fact. Disinheritance was a legal consequence for severe crimes and dishonourable conduct in medieval aristocratic families. For a medieval noble family, land was the foundation of their power, wealth, and status. Titles confirmed their place in the social hierarchy. To lose these through disinheritance was catastrophic. It meant the effective ruin of the lineage, reducing proud families to commoner status, or worse, to perpetual poverty and ignominy. The knight's act of cheating in the lists, therefore, could have consequences that spanned generations, a legacy of shame that overshadowed his descendants. You can almost feel the collective despair of a family witnessing their hard-won heritage crumbling because of one man's pursuit of dishonest glory. It's like losing a family business that's been around for centuries, all because someone got caught rigging a local pie-eating contest. The reasoning behind such a harsh punishment was rooted in the medieval understanding of collective responsibility and the sanctity of loyalty. A knight's honour was not purely individual, it reflected upon his entire family and his lord. If he betrayed that honour through cheating, especially in a public arena like a tournament, The stain was considered to extend to his bloodline. Disinheritance served as a powerful deterrent, forcing knights to consider not just their own fate, but the future of their children and grandchildren before resorting to dishonest tactics. It created an immense pressure to conform to the chivalric code. Remember Section 2? To protect the family's legacy. Moreover, the lands and wealth confiscated through disinheritance would typically revert to the crown or the overlord, providing an additional incentive for powerful figures to rigorously prosecute cases of severe dishonour. This economic aspect further cemented the use of disinheritance as a punitive measure. A quirky tidbit is that in some noble families, particularly those with a strong sense of ancestral pride, a dishonoured son might be formally read out of the family chronicles or genealogies, a symbolic erasure from their recorded history, even if legal disinheritance didn't always follow. This was an additional layer of shame, making them a non-person in their own lineage. It's like being unfriended by all your ancestors. Historians still argue whether disinheritance was a common application for tournament cheating, or if it was predominantly reserved for acts of treason or rebellion against a sovereign, with cheating merely being one facet of a larger pattern of disloyalty. Regardless, the chilling prospect of causing your family's loss through your own dishonourable actions undeniably represented one of the most feared consequences for any knight. It was a stark reminder that the pursuit of glory through deceit could lead not just to personal ruin, but to the utter destruction of a family's standing and future, a testament to the unforgiving nature of medieval justice when honour was irrevocably betrayed. From the devastating consequences of disinheritance, which plagued a cheater's lineage, you now confront the most extreme and dangerous method for resolving accusations of profound dishonour: trial by combat, believed to be nothing less than God's judgment. Imagine a knight accused of cheating, standing not before a panel of judges but before his accuser, with only steel and divine favour to prove his innocence or guilt. It's like a medieval game show where the prize is your life, and the host is a very angry deity. Trial by combat was a legal and judicial practice prevalent in medieval Europe, reserved for situations where ordinary evidence was insufficient, or when the honour of a noble was at stake. For a knight accused of egregious cheating in a tournament, especially if the accusations were vehemently denied and could not be definitively proven through testimony or equipment inspection, a formal challenge to trial by combat might be issued. This was not a friendly joust, it was a battle to the death, or at least until one party yielded or was incapacitated, and it was implicitly believed that the victor was favoured by God, thus revealing God's judgment. This is a mainstream historical fact. Trial by combat was a recognised, albeit controversial, legal method in medieval Europe to resolve disputes when other evidence was lacking. The stakes in a trial by combat were absolute. The accused knight, if he accepted the challenge, and refusing it often amounted to an admission of guilt, would face his accuser, or a champion fighting on his behalf, in a fight to the finish. These duels were often conducted in specific courts of combat, and were imbued with deep religious significance. Both parties would swear solemn oaths before the fight, invoking divine intervention, and the outcome was considered a direct manifestation of God's will. You can almost feel the cold dread in the pit of a cheater's stomach, knowing that his deceit, hidden from human eyes, would now be exposed by divine intervention, or so the belief went. It's like taking the ultimate lie detector test, but if you fail, you don't just look bad, you literally lose your head. For a knight who had, for example, used doctored lances, remember Section 7, or employed magical charms, from Section 9, the prospect of facing God's judgment in such a direct manner was terrifying. His earthly cunning might not stand up to divine scrutiny. If he lost, it was seen as clear proof of his guilt, not just in the eyes of men, but in the eyes of heaven itself. This added an immense spiritual weight to the punishment, far beyond any earthly consequence. His family's loss, recall Section 28, would be compounded by the eternal damnation implied by losing such a trial. A quirky tidbit is that while ideally a trial by combat would involve the accuser and accused, sometimes champions could be appointed to fight on their behalf, particularly if one party was too old, infirm, or of a social status that exempted them from direct combat. This introduced a fascinating, albeit still brutal layer of legal strategy, where you could literally hire someone to die for your honour. Historians still argue whether trial by combat was primarily a tool for delivering actual justice, or if it was more a mechanism for deterring false accusations and maintaining social order through violence. Regardless, the chilling reality of facing God's judgment in a literal fight for one's life undoubtedly served as the ultimate deterrent against egregious cheating in tournaments. The belief that divine favour would shine upon the honourable, ensuring the defeat of the deceitful, made this the most terrifying and final arbiter of a knight's integrity. From the brutal, divinely ordained resolution of trial by combat, your long journey through the harsh world of medieval tournament justice now reaches its peaceful conclusion, pondering the enduring ideal of fair play's echo, a timeless human desire for justice and fair competition. Imagine looking back at the knights, their shining armour, their shattered lances, and realising that despite all the cunning and the brutality, the fundamental human yearning for an honest contest, for a level playing field, has always resonated. It's like watching an ancient game, full of strange rules and harsh penalties, and still recognising the universal desire to just play fair. The detailed, often gruesome catalogue of punishments we've explored, from the public shame of stocks and shame, recall section 19, to the permanent scars of branding, from section 25, to the utter ruin of disinheritance, from section 28, and the ultimate test of God's judgment in trial by combat, just discussed in section 29, all serve as powerful testament to one fundamental truth. Medieval society, for all its complexities and contradictions, placed an incredibly high value on fair play. Despite the high stakes, the fierce competition, and the ever-present temptation to cheat, there was an enduring commitment to the integrity of the contest. This is a mainstream historical fact. Despite the prevalence of competition, the ideal of fair play was highly valued in medieval tournaments and society. The elaborate systems of oversight, involving heralds, remember section 12, marshals, from section 13, and judges, as detailed in section 14, demonstrate a concerted effort to enforce rules and deter dishonesty. The very existence of such severe penalties underscores the deep societal condemnation of those who sought to gain glory or riches through deceit. Cheating wasn't just a minor infraction. It was an attack on the very fabric of chivalry, a betrayal of the knightly ideal, and an insult to the honour of all involved. You can almost hear the faint whisper of those ancient ideals carried on the wind through centuries, reminding us that some human values are truly timeless. It's like discovering that even 1,000 years ago, people hated queue jumpers as much as we do now. The persistent fair plays echo throughout history, from the medieval lists to modern sporting arenas, reveals a fundamental human desire for justice and competition. We want to believe that victory is earned through skill, courage, and honest effort, not through manipulation or fraud. This yearning for authenticity and competition is a universal thread that connects us across time and culture. It speaks to our inherent need for order, for recognised merit, and for consequences when that order is disrupted by deceit. Even as tournaments evolved, declined, and eventually gave way to other forms of martial display and sport, the lessons learned from policing cheating and the moral imperative of fair play continued to resonate. The institutional memory of how easily honour could be tarnished, and how fiercely it needed to be protected, influenced later codes of conduct in warfare, duelling, and even early modern sports. A quirky tidbit that beautifully illustrates this enduring ideal is the historical account of tournaments sometimes including a court of honour, where knights could openly accuse each other of infractions, not just for cheating in the joust, but for unchivalric behaviour outside of it. This created a wider net for policing conduct, reflecting a broader commitment to upholding honour in all aspects of a knight's life. It's like a medieval version of a sportsmanship committee that never sleeps. Historians still argue whether the extreme severity of these punishments was truly effective as a deterrent, or if they often led to a culture of fear and secrecy around cheating. Regardless, the very existence of such a comprehensive and brutal punitive system reflects a society's deep, unwavering commitment to the ideal of fair play. The enduring fair play's echo from the medieval tournament stands as a powerful testament to humanity's timeless pursuit of justice, ensuring that even in the most dangerous and glamorous contests, the principles of honour would, ideally, always prevail. As you drift now, away from the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel, let the images of those ancient lists gently fade. The dazzling armour, the fierce competition, the whispers of deceit, and the chilling consequences all melt into the quiet of the night. Remember the knights, not just as warriors, but as men bound by a complex code striving for glory, yet always haunted by the spectre of dishonour. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, shaping armour, now blends with the gentle murmur of sleep, just as the fear of a branding iron fades into the soft comfort of your pillow. You've journeyed through a world where reputation was everything, and a single act of dishonesty could shatter a life. But even in that harsh era, the desire for a fair contest, for an honourable victory, resonated strongly. The lessons of those long-ago tournaments, of consequences for betrayals, still echo faintly, a timeless reminder that integrity ultimately leaves the deepest, most cherished mark. Let those distant echoes lull you now, knowing that some values, like a good night's rest, are truly universal. Sweet dreams.